So the title of the lecture was The Dynamics of Welfare Reform. So what motivated your choice of topic for the Adam Smith lecture?
So my key motivation is I think this is a kind of first order set of issues thinking about welfare reform, particularly thinking about what sort of shocks people face over their lifetimes, how well insured are they, what the incentive costs. These are, I think, are really important questions. In terms of the Adam Smith lecture, if you think about Adam Smith's work himself, a lot of that work was focused on a chunk of it was about how efficiently markets work, but throughout it was a recognition that there were people who were going to lose out from markets working efficiently, or markets working. And there's an open question in a lot of his work about, well, what could be done about people who are going to lose out from competition or from markets. And I do, in some sense, that's been an open question ever since. I think it's one of the key questions as economists we should be thinking about.
Your lecture focuses on two really interesting examples of welfare reform. So the first one looks at the change in welfare benefits associated with the Clinton government in 1996, where there's an introduction of the time limit on the number of years of benefits for those receiving welfare in the US. Could you tell us a little bit about the justification for the welfare reform?
So a lot of the rhetoric around the time of the reform was concentrated on being the too many single mothers and marital instability. Marital instability was bad for children, and alongside that there were people claiming benefits rather than working. And so there was this pressure on these different dimensions to try to reduce the number of single mothers and among those women who remained as single mothers, to increase their employment and to reduce the benefit claiming. So that was the motivation. And I think one of the in our kind of analysis of it, thinking about it, it was, well, we should be weighing up those incentive effects against the loss of insurance that happens to those women through these reforms. And I think one of my key messages from that was, we have a reform which does have the incentive effects which were intended. It did lead to a reduction in divorce. It led to a reduction in benefit claiming. It led to an increase in employment. But for people at the bottom of the distribution, that led to a loss in welfare, a loss in the insurance that they were receiving from these bad shocks that hit them through their lives.
Your second example looks at disability insurance and focuses on the trade-off between false rejections and false acceptances. Could you tell us a little bit about what motivated your focus on this particular area?
So we started out thinking about it because of trying to understand how important health shocks were to people's lives. And particularly thinking about when we saw fluctuations in wages of people's lives, were they being driven by people having health shocks? And that then naturally led us to think, well, health shocks are things which are pretty persistent, and they are and very serious when they happen, and they're uninsured by the private sector, or very little insured by the private sector. So that's why we started thinking about disability insurance per se. And I think one of the things which I found most striking is that a lot of the work on looking at disability insurance has been focused on how much it's induced people to start cheating the system. And it seemed that missed the point of the value of the insurance for individuals who actually needed it. I think I was still extremely surprised at the extent of individuals who needed the insurance actually being turned down. And I think that's, as I said in the talk, one of my most surprising results in my career has been exactly that conclusion, that we have, on average, 53% of individuals who need the insurance being turned down. It's like saying, oh, I've bought my house insurance. I've bought my insurance against my house being burnt down. My house gets burnt down, and then I'm told, actually, you're not going to pay out. And then what's worse is, we're not going to pay out because you're a woman. We would pay out if you're a man. So, but it is that analogy. It's individuals who paid their we're looking at individuals who are eligible, who paid their payroll taxes to be eligible, who then, when they actually need it, are not receiving it. And I found that pretty shocking. But it started out thinking, this is an important part of people's lives. How well insured are they? And then thinking, well, why are we all obsessing about incentive costs?
So you focus on two US examples in the lecture. What implications do your findings have for the UK welfare system? So what can the UK learn from the results from your papers?
So I think there's a kind of general result, which is when we're evaluating policies in the UK, we do the same thing. We focus on what's the incentive effects. We're all, where we're looking at the minimum wage or we're looking at universal credit, we're focusing on what's been the impact on claiming, on employment. A lot of the motivation between the Department of Work and Pensions is to get people back into work. And I think that when we're doing that, we should be weighing it up against what the insurance value is, what the benefit is for people who are having in this situation. If you look at a lot of the rhetoric in the last 6 months or so has been about how do we change the way in which we think about disability. We move people onto this kind of work capability group to try to get more people back into work. And I'm not saying that's a good or a bad policy. I'm just saying that when we're evaluating, we have to be really careful in thinking about what the welfare consequences are. I think that's one thing. The other lesson I take is I actually think it's really valuable to have the data to be able to answer these questions. And I think because I have spoken to DWP about these results in the US, but I think one of the kind of problematic aspects is we cannot do that same analysis in the UK because we don't have that sort of linkage. And I think that's a real problem for us as academics to be able to properly evaluate some of these policies which are in place.